Life, culture, and current events from a biblical perspective. 2020 on Vision.
One of those topics that sometimes is uncomfortable to talk about it. But if we don't talk about it, it's not as though the problem is going away. So many of those who are in charge of policy settings, whether it's at state government level and federal government level, don't appear to have much of a mindfulness to the way that Christian morality works. Let's talk again today about one of those very, very serious topics, and that is the sexualisation of our children. And Bill Muhlenberg from Culture Watch been blogging about these things this past week. Bill, welcome back to 2020.
Great to be back.
Bill, it doesn't matter whether we're talking federal politics, we're talking state politics, there does seem to be a disconnect with what we would understand as a sound biblical Christian morality, which might lead to a flourishing society. But there are others who have different ideas. You've been writing in one of your latest articles about the government's ongoing sexual assault on our children. Some people will say, how can this be happening? What are your thoughts as to what governments are doing?
Yes, well, it's certainly happening, and sadly most Christians don't have a clue that it is. Let's put it this way, if some creepy old guy started coming up to your kids and talk to them about their body parts and playing around with them and finding enjoyment in it and trying to sexually titillate your children, you'd report this guy to the police straight away. Well, what happens when we effectively have governments doing exactly the same thing in the form of comprehensive sex ed education? The safe schools, so-called programs, supposed to be about bullying, but are all about the sexualization of our children. When the state and our schools get involved in this very thing, every single parent should be up in arms.
Well, Bill, the next big election on the horizon is the Victorian state election coming up on the 24th of November. It has been an ongoing challenge talking about these issues that are going on in Victoria with regards to the Safe Schools program, and knowing that the Premier there in Victoria is adamant that these programs ought to be in all of the schools of Victoria. Your concerns about the Safe Schools program, because when you say the creepy old man sidling up to your children, there is a sense in which this program seems to take things a step further, and it's surveying children and asking them about their sexuality. How does that work?
Yeah, well, look, it's already happening both here and overseas. Certainly Victoria has been leading the way, sadly. Concerned parents have discovered that their kids are being asked very intrusive questions about their sexuality. Year 8 students, for example, and others. That's all part of this comprehensive sex ed. It's all part of this radical safe schools package. As you say, Victoria is the worst state in the whole country. Dan Andrews and Labour have absolutely insisted that it be rammed down the throats of our children. And, of course, with an election coming up, if they get back in, it's just going to be much, much worse. At the moment, most Christian schools can be exempt, but, of course, we know they're working to take away those exemptions as well. So every school, private, independent, Christian, will be forced to have these pro-homosexual, pro-trans, radical sexuality classes, and it's already happening now in all of the state schools, so imagine how much worse. So there are real consequences to our elections, and probably this is one of the most important ones we've had for quite some time.
Enlarge a little here, Bill, because when you mention surveys of children, asking them about their sexuality, this is not the first time in the last century that this sort of thing has happened. Some people will be familiar with the name Alfred Kinsey, and was renowned for virtually a experimentalism on children and developing some of the radical ways that he talked about sexuality. This is not the first time. These experiments have happened before.
They certainly have, and pity the poor children involved. I've written many articles on Kinsey and the horrible sex abuse he was guilty of, including in my two most recent pieces this week. Back in the 40s, he wrote extensively and published books. He made it onto the cover of Time magazine. Everybody thought he was wonderful. But if you simply read his books, and I've got copies, you see that real sex abuse was involved. He actually claimed that people are sexual from birth, that babies and toddlers are sexual beings, that babies and toddlers can have orgasms. And we know that Kinsey took many sex predators out of the prisons and used them in their experiments. We know they had experiments on toddlers, babies. He's even got clinical tables, for example, Table 34 in his book, which I talk about, detailing, what these babies and toddlers went through as adults sexually experimented on them. Just shocking, horrible stuff, but everybody thought he was great. And of course, now we've got a whole generation of people who followed fully in his footsteps. Hefner and Playboy, of course, popularized the Kinsey sex abuse. Sad to say, our former head of the Australian Medical Association, who's just now won the Wentworth by-election, it seems, Karen Phelps, who is a lesbian, she's been pushing this for years as well. She also has said, even 20, 25 years ago, children are sexual from birth, babies can masturbate, some horrible stuff, and she's now a parliamentarian, going to be pushing this even more. So shocking stuff, scary stuff. Christians really need to wake up and be aware of what's going on with our children.
Bill, the idea of parents taking responsibility for the raising of their children and having it within their own power to choose a time when they might introduce their children to the birds and the bees story, perhaps in a traditional way that you and I might think of that. Clearly there is some warning required for children to become resistant to some of the pressures and the threats that are against them when it comes to sexual predators, and they need to be taught. But this goes far beyond that. It takes the parents' responsibility away and puts it in the hands of the state, who are, as you say, using these crazy ideas that have been developed by the likes of Kinsey to influence our very children.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Parents should be involved in this, not the schools, not the state. And parents should be able to include with this not just the mere facts, the birds and the bees, but the whole moral framework that must go with all sex education. We're talking about pretty potent stuff here. The ability to, bring babies into the world. This is not insignificant. So there's a moral foundation that has to be laid when we talk about things like this, what we owe to others, respect we show to people, respect for human life. None of that you're going to get in secular sex ed programs at schools. You're going to be told anything goes, all forms of sexuality are just fine. You don't have to feel guilty about anything. You can have as many sexual partners as you want. You can start as young as you want. This is the line being pushed in our safe schools, so-called programs. Has nothing to do with what most parents would want their children to learn about such an important issue. So really we have a war against the state and parents, and the state are trying to co-opt the parents, take over their role on such a very important thing as the training of their very own children.
Back to Victoria, and this is your neck of the woods. You've got a state election coming up on the 24th of November. The Andrews government pushing very heavily this whole Safe Schools program and I imagine all the spin-offs that go along with that. What about the Victorian opposition? What do you feel about them? Are they taking an alternative view? What should be the idea that parents should be thinking about, perhaps in the lead up to the Victorian election, voting-wise? Put you on the spot here, Bill Muhlenberg.
Well, I think all Victorian parents who are listening right now, even if you're not a Christian, even if you're, you don't have to be a Christian to be concerned about the well-being of your children, to be concerned that they're being sexualized at a vulnerable young age. Their innocence is being stripped away from them. Every parent in Victoria should be greatly concerned. And so at least the good news is here we do have an alternative. Matthew Guy, the Liberal, running to get the top job, take it away from Dan Andrews. He has made it clear if the Liberals get in November 24, they will stop the Safe Schools program and all the wretched stuff that goes with it, the gender bending, the idea you can pick and choose your own gender. It's a fluid concept. There is no biological basis to male and female. And by the way, I see Tasmania is deciding to get rid of male and female on their birth certificates. So it's spreading like a virus, like a plague. So at least here in Victoria, if Liberals get in, a good hunk of this madness, this assault on our innocent children will be stopped by the Liberal government.
Interestingly, and I take a sober view of this, Bill, that people that are listening to this conversation today will probably wholeheartedly agree with you. But getting this message into the mainstream, the public sphere, which is often dominated by left-wing media, who in fact agree most likely with the sentiments of the Andrews government. And that's what I guess keeps Andrews ahead in the polls. Somehow or other, you've got to work very hard to get this into the public domain and for people to understand this challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And which is why, of course, the alternative media exists. That's why I exist. That's why Culture Watch has been going now for about 12 years. You will not hear this stuff in the Melbourne Age, in our ABC, SBS. You'll hear the exact opposite. They'll be fully promoting all this stuff, this war on our children. So we have to go to the alternative media. We have to learn what's going on, and then we have to share it far and wide. As just one example, in both of the articles I did this week on the state's sexual assault on our kids, I featured a 15-minute video just put out a few days ago. It looks at the whole Safe Schools program. It quotes directly from Karen Phelps, our new MP, and some of the horrible things she said about sexuality in children. It looks at some of the pedophile connection at La Trobe University in the Safe Schools program. Mind you, all of this I've documented for years anyways, but it's good to be there. The actual video clip, you can watch these authors and experts themselves making these outrageous claims about how they're targeting our children. So if nothing else, go to those two articles, click on the 15-minute video, watch it, be absolutely shocked and appalled, and if you're not shocked, you better check your pulse, and then share it far and wide. We have to make these things go viral. We have to alert parents. Your children are under attack. We must stand up and protect our kids.
Well, Bill, I'll point people to these two articles that you're talking about. And there are some links in those articles where people may be able to take these things a little further. Just a reminder, too, to parents that in Victoria there's a number of groups who are doing some letterbox dropping of pamphlets, raising the awareness of Victorian residents ahead of the election. I know the Australian Christian Lobby is doing that. I know there's another group called Cause that are doing that too. But let me point you to Bill Muhlenberg's articles. Go to billmuhlenberg.com, or you can Google Culture Watch, one word, and you'll find these articles. The one we've been talking about today, the government's ongoing sexual assault on our children. Another one is there talking about the Wentworth by-election and the state of the nation. Bill Muhlenberg, thanks so much for taking some time to talk to us once again today on 2020.
Always a pleasure.
Before you go, thanks for listening.
There's lots more great audio on demand, or you can listen to us live at visionradio.org.au.
And remember, Vision is listener supported. Your donation,
large or small,
will help us continue connecting faith to life for hundreds of thousands of people across Australia and around the world.
Learn more or donate today at visionradio.org.au.